I'm going to start by presenting myself. I'm Lorena, and I am a recent graduate from Carleton University, and I want to present here today the work that I did for my master's thesis, which was in collaboration with members of Tsuut'ina Nation. Thank you. And so I want to tell you a story, which is how the Tsuut'ina Language Archive interface came into being. So first, I want to acknowledge the participation of and the work of members of Tsuut'ina Nation, especially Janelle Kren Starlight, Hannevik Crown, and Berg Menibuns, who actively participated into the creation of this interface, and also the supervision of Professor Christopher Cox. So the origin of the Tsuut'ina Language Archive is, of course, in the Tsuut'ina Nation. Tsuut'ina is it's an Adini language which is spoken in Canada in the region of Alberta. Latest numbers estimate that there are around 17 speakers left, most of them belonging to the older generation. However, they have a very active community-based documentation and revitalization programs. There is interest from the youngest generations in learning Tsuut'ina. And this is realized by a variety of programs. In the revitalization side, there are many language classes that are directed to different age groups. And in the documentation side, they are trying to record as much Tsuut'ina uses as possible. And thanks to this, there are around 100 hours annually of Tsuut'ina audiovisual recordings that are being created. And this is more or less the origin of the Tsuut'ina Language Archive. The community has been collecting these linguistic and cultural documents that are about Tsuut'ina or written in, written, spoken, etc. in Tsuut'ina. These documents included written or tabular records that could be meeting notes, could be legacy materials. They also included many audiovisual records of language in use, and some of them were being transcribed, but of course we all know about the transcription problem. I don't have to go into that. So most of these audiovisual records are still not being transcribed. The technologies that were employed in the archive were ELAN or transcribers for annotation of various documents, Lamita for organization, and they were stored in hard disks. And this was all in place before I arrived to this project. So they already had materials, annotations, and a mode of preservation. And the next step was to think about their dissemination. And this is when we started to talk about creating an interface for these materials. There was a problem that was discussed at length, which was that the audiovisual files were usually very long and unedited. So the question was, who is going to actually want to access this? There were, so to put in context, many of these documents were just recording events where Tsuut'ina was expected to be spoken. So they lasted for hours, and in many cases there was only some parts which included Tsuut'ina. So the question was, if we provide access to this, maybe people are not going to be able to find what they need. And here it's this is why I want to highlight the importance of design in this web-based interface, because depending on the choices that we made, this would affect the accessibility to those materials, which materials could be accessed, whether they would be used and for what uses they could be applied, and the audience in general. Because of this importance, we decided to employ a methodology that included the users in all of the stages of the implementation process. We employed user-centered design, which basically means that in all the process of the design of this interface, I was meeting with a subgroup of expected users, and and they were providing feedback about what they needed. Thank you. So this was a very interdisciplinary and collaborative process, which happened during 5 months for the design of this prototype. And I must say that I really recommend this kind of work because it also was the origin of many meta-linguistic or meta-questions around language archiving and how some practices that exist in the literature could be applied to Tsuut'ina. So it was a very interesting topic, but also not this presentation. Tsuut'ina Gunaha Institute provided the language material that was employed for development as testing purposes. And I can talk very briefly about the functionalities that could be found on the archive. So we have basic upload, download, metadata search, and discovery for all kinds of materials that were archived. We have the possibility to view in browser most of the materials except those that used proprietary software. So for example, Microsoft Office. And we implemented also full text search for ELAM files to access those annotations and offer this accessibility to audiovisual files. And so, of course, the first step was to think about which people were going to use the archive. And the conversations suggested that, of course, they were mostly interested in the community, accessing them. And so, for now, it's only members of Tsuut'ina Nation. More specifically, we wanted to aim to cover two main needs, which was language learning. So we wanted that teachers could access to the material to create some classroom material lessons, and also learners in general, if they wanted to work independently. And in the case of language documentation, we wanted to provide an alternative way of, an accessible way of preserving and cataloging, that it didn't only rely on hard disks. So we focused in annotated audiovisual files. As you have seen, in some of the functionalities are only available for this kind of work because we had to focus first on something, and this was especially important for our objectives since many of the current Tsuut'ina learners complained about how difficult it was for them to learn pronunciation. With the current situation and the lack of access to native speakers, and also because of the importance of storytelling in their community to transmit knowledge. And so our main objectives was to find a way to have user-friendly information retrieval for the users, but also to omit sensitive or restrictive material that was found in these ELAM files, and we didn't want everyone to access them. So why didn't we just use ELAM for the information retrieval? I mean, it is possible to do this, but what we aimed was to provide a way that didn't require any specialized training, that didn't need a specialized software, especially many members of the community prefer to use their phones. So we wanted something that could be accessed on multiple platforms, and that could hide restricted information, as I said, and that could offer a standardized display when we don't actually have a standard way of creating ELAM annotations, even within the community. So one example here, this is one of the ELAM files. Here we can find 23 tiers. And out of them, probably users would only be interested in the Tsuut'ina text, the word-for-word translation, and the English translation. So we wanted a way to make this more accessible without having to learn each time what's the structure that was employed. So that's how we changed from that ELAM file to this way of displaying data. Which provided access. In this case, this is the page which provides access to the whole ELAM annotation. And here we include the Tsuut'ina transcription and English transcription for each of the different segments, along with some audio. And also, we wanted to provide full text search, as I said. So this is an example of the results when we search. I think that the word that they searched was garden. And this is one example of one of the results, which would include to which collection it belonged, who spoke this, so who is displayed in the audio file, the Tsuut'ina transcription, the glossing, and the English translation. So for this, what I used was a semi-automatic approach. Thank you. So because we wanted to find to create a model that could be a bit more general, we didn't want, and we wanted to maybe potentially be able to adapt to other, to make this solution available to other communities. What we did was to establish an approach that required some minimal manual changes. So we asked the annotators that they use the tier types functionalities on ELAN to provide specific tier types to what they want to be the native text, the gloss, and the translation. Sorry, that's a typo. And also, optionally, they could mark as another tier the restricted information that they didn't want everyone to access. From there, the archive managers could indicate which were the tiers that in the end that were used for the text, gloss, transcription, and translation for each collection or for each file, and the rest was all automatic. And I want to do a demo about this. So this is another thing that I haven't added, which is that we used batch upload. We implemented a batch upload because we wanted to be able to make it user-friendly, also the uploading the whole material. So once the path to all the data archive with La Meta is employed, we can, it's uploaded, we can add the information of the tier reference. And in this case, we have all the information matching the name of the source tier and the destiny tier. So, and this is an example of how looking for hello, this is an example in data, not in Tsuut'ina, but obviously in Spanish. Yeah. So that's it. I could go on and on about the functionalities, but I think this was the most important part. Thank you. So before I wrap up, I want to mention some of these challenges that came from this work and also from deciding to make this sort of community-based approach, which is, of course, one of the advantages that this has is that this work can be continued by the community. It was not just me as a master's student who did this, and once my master's is over, this is forgotten. This was the objective, that it could be something that could be used after. However, now we are trying to see how we can actually host this in a community server and how we can find the data capacity, since these audiovisual files require quite a lot of space. Some of the future work that we are that is currently happening is we are working on a system of permissions so that we can ensure that this archive can be used for the staff that have access to all the original raw files, but also that other members can access some of this data as well. We want to expand the full text search to other formats, so for textual documents, for documents with transcriptions from Transcribus, for example. Transcribus, and adding cultural elements to the Tsuut'ina website, which I must say right now it doesn't look so beautiful because I am not a web designer. But this is something that we would like to include in the future. Thank you very much. And here is my contact in case that you want to ask some questions later on. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And we have exactly 5 minutes for questions and more if we want to stay on. Yes, Mandana.
Thank you very much for this. It was really interesting to learn about your work and what you're doing. As you know, right, your collaborators held a grant with us, and so we have materials from this community in our archive, which is to a certain extent processed. So one of the biggest issues is, of course, if this is developing, what's going to be the relationship of the materials and the things that you have provided to the same material that comes from this project that is now in our archive?
Well, that's something I'm not sure if I can completely say, because I have only worked in the interface part, and as I say, when I was incorporated to this, the Tsuut'ina Language Archive was already being created, at least analogically. I think that what they are prioritizing right now is adding materials that can be readily used for pedagogical purposes. And after that, they will start to see about adding more and more material, and probably there it will come into place also those that are hosted and archived in other archives as well.
Thank you.
While we're waiting for other questions, I was wondering, you mentioned the transcription bottleneck for Tsuut'ina. I remember Chris Cox was a very early adopter of Persephone. He created an ELAN plugin that would allow people to see an automatically generated transcript. Yeah. And because this is not an outdoor setting, and most of their recordings were done in a sort of radio studio or something, the audio was super clean, and it yielded excellent results. Is that still being used?
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, a lot of the advances that we have and that there are right now in terms of the annotation is thanks to this kind of work. He has some recognizers that are for detecting voice in the audios, and other recognizers are specifically to transcribe Tsuut'ina. And in fact, another part of my work is trying to distribute this with installers. Which I haven't talked here, but it has definitely helped a lot to speed up the annotation process. Yes.
Yes, it's a remarkable case of actually implementing NLP, natural language processing tools, in a way that is locally seen beneficially and yielding good results. Yes.
When looking at the translation of certain terms that you come across, are there perhaps objects or phenomena in the nature that is specific to the area that you find difficult to translate into English or Spanish because you may not know what it is precisely, or because it refers to certain types of animals that can be two animals, or plants that sort of cover a different range?
I haven't dealt with the translation myself. I know that in some of these documents that we can see recording names of fauna, flora of the area, sometimes it is the indigenous name is just preserved also in the translation, also with the historical figures or mythological animals from their stories. Sometimes there is no translation, so they just keep the indigenous name, and they add a note explaining that it is because of that. Yes.
Well, yes. A final question?
A final, very quick question. This was really nice. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about the expectations for the design and the functions that the community had when this process started, and what type of back and forth there might have been with pilot versions of the system and the feedback that you might have gotten?
Yes. So I think the collaborative approach really helped to have these sort of discussions and to make it into what it is now and what it will be. One of the largest concerns were to make this an independent tool that did not take the space of other existing tools. So for example, there is a mobile app already for learning Tsuut'ina, and there is an online dictionary. So at the beginning, when I showed the search results, I remember one of the participants asking, how is this different from a dictionary? And of course, there it came trying to see which kind of text and which kind of materials we would like to have here, because of course we can upload the dictionary, but that will make this a dictionary. So this was specifically to see language in context, to see the stories, and to offer an easy way to access those materials that were not part of the dictionary. And I couldn't show it here, but we also tried to make connections and integrate them together. So in the results page, when there is a Tsuut'ina text, it's possible to click on each word and it will take to the dictionary entry online. So that was one example, but of course the discussions included so many.
Yes, so what we want now is not just one follow-up talk, but 3 follow-up talks, but these are going to happen in a different space. And for this session, let's thank our speaker again.
Thank you.